Welcome. My name is Deborah Luchin, and I am currently the Vice President of the League of Women Voters of the La Crosse area. And we would like to welcome everybody today to this is our final Lunch and Learn of the program year. And I'm going to recognize the league members who've organized our programs this year, including Ellen Frantz, Leslie Wagner, Deborah Buffton, Barbara Soderin, Karen Kroll, Mary Nugent. Today, Nora is helping. She's our communication guru, and she's helping me today. Thank you for joining us on behalf of the board. We're excited to hear from Margaret Krome about the National Farm Bill and why it matters to voters. Before we begin, I want you to just say thank you to all our league members who work so diligently at educating voters, got out the vote, and were involved with voter registration this spring. We'd like you to mark your calendars. The annual meeting for the League of Women Voters of the La Crosse area will be May 15th. It will be virtual. The Upper Mississippi River Region annual meeting will also be virtual, and Carolyn will tell us some more about that. And then on June 10th, we are actually hosting the state's annual meeting here in La Crosse. So be watching social media and your news updates about those coming events. I'll remind you that the League of Women Voters seeks to empower voters and defend democracy through advocacy, education, litigation at the local, state, and national levels. I will remind you that we had a legislative breakfast recently where we met with our local legislators. It is recorded and available on our website. It is available to members only. So you can check out our website at lwvlacrosse.org. And if you're interested in the League state legislative advocacy, please go to the state's website. On the left-hand column, look for Leagues in Action, and you'll see their current legislative advocacy by our state league. And you can also sign up for alerts. As for the logistics today, we ask that you type your questions for the speakers into the question and answer box at the bottom of the screen. And when the speakers have Margaret has completed her presentation, we'll have some time for Q&A. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation of citizens in government. It works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. We take action on public policy positions that are established through member study and consensus. We never support or oppose any political party or candidate. Carolyn Mullen-Jenkins, who represents our league and the Wisconsin League and the league's interleague Upper Mississippi River Region Collaborative, will introduce today's speaker and share a little update about the UMR group. Thank you, Carolyn.
Hi there. Thank you for inviting the Upper Mississippi River Region Interleague organization to participate in today's event. We are a 4-state, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois, group of more than 60 local leagues that concern ourselves with water quantity and quality issues. Our outreach covers not only the Mississippi River, but all the lakes, streams, ponds, and rivers that make up the Mississippi River watershed. Nutrient pollution, urban and rural runoff, pipelines, PFAS, and climate-related weather patterns impact surface and groundwater. For this reason, we feel that the Farm Bill is one of the most significant pieces of federal legislation. And to learn more about UMR, please feel free to join us at League of Women Voters, umrr.org, and read our newsletter. And as Deb said earlier, our annual meeting is virtual, and it is coming up on May 22nd. We will have our business meeting at 5:30, and then at 7 o'clock, please join us for our presenters. At 7 p.m., Jessica Roloff, League of Women Voters U.S. Regional Representative, will be talking to us about how she foresees her involvement in the Midwest region. And Elizabeth Joy Muscat Mueller, League of Women Voters U.S. Climate Interest Group, Water Team, will be talking about their organization, and she will also just give us a little bit of information about the Interleague organization from Lake Michigan. Deb asked if I would share a piece of legislation, Wisconsin water legislation, and I wanted to read something to you that I just received from Deb Krome Miller, the executive director of the League of Women Voters Wisconsin. She says, "Good morning. I'm reaching out to let you know that we," meaning the League of Women Voters Wisconsin, attorneys for Midwest environmental advocates, and representatives of SOH2O met with representatives of the Department of Health Services Secretary Office. The purpose of the meeting was similar to that with meeting with DNR Secretary to ask for expedited groundwater standards implementation for PFAS. Together, our working group is advocating for a quick process since this has been dragging on since the introduction of Cycle 10 recommendations in 2018. Without a standard, Wisconsin is falling behind on testing and remediation and people's health that is being negatively impacted by PFAS across the state. And she goes on to say here that the fastest track to groundwater standard at this point for the Department of Health Services is to not complete a new comprehensive literature review of the most recent EPA drinking water standard of 4 points per trillion and use the 2022 recommendations of 20 points per trillion. We believe that both the DHS and the DNR are willing to consider this for the purposes of getting a standard in place. Once implemented, the state can re-examine the standard given the new information from the EPA. We also believe that working toward a 4 point per trillion standard at this time will trigger the need for a new environmental impact study and cost estimate. At 20 parts per trillion, the cost is under the 10 million threshold, estimated at about 6 million. So they're trying to figure out how to expedite the groundwater standards because we need that in place. We still have significant communities facing PFAS pollution and other pollutions. And until we get that threshold down, the people in those communities are going to be stuck because they aren't going to qualify for getting free water from the DNR. They aren't going to be able to sue the PFAS companies. Nothing can happen. So this is a significant step, and I hope it's successful. Then we'll move on to our most important part of the program now. I'm going to introduce Margaret. Margaret Krome is Policy Program Director for the Michaels Fields Agricultural Institute in East Troy, Wisconsin. For 3 decades, she has helped develop and fund federal, state, and local programs and policies supporting environmentally sound, profitable, and socially responsible agriculture, including 2 decades coordinating the Sustainable Agriculture Movement's National Grassroots Appropriation Campaign. In recent years, she has advanced several agricultural initiatives, including coordinating a 5-year cover crop research and outreach collaboration, securing funding for a 5-year soil health collaborative, and initiatives on racial justice, grazing, small grains, and diverse perennials. She also conducts workshops and webinars nationwide on grant writing and using federal programs to support sustainable agriculture. And with that, I'll introduce you now, Margaret Krome. And Margaret, I don't know how you have time to even eat and sleep with all this under your belt. Thank you for all you've done.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. And I just said it's starting. Yay. Okay, let's kick this in and see if we can make sure it goes to the whole. There we are, just as I hoped it would go. Great. And you're still seeing this thing up top, and why I am seeing that, I don't know, but I moved it. And I'm going to make myself invisible. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am such an appreciator of the League of Women Voters, and thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for helping to drive information and turnout for the most recent election. I feel like you all are the tools of empowerment. And in that spirit, I'm wanting to, oh my goodness, no, why is this not going? I don't seem to be able to move my screen. I did it before when we were working it through. Let's see. For whatever reason, it seems like it's stuck. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Margaret. At least I can. We're all hearing you.
But how funny that I am unable to get out of this screen. There we go. Who knows? Maybe there was a break in our internet for whatever reason. I don't know why, but it just wouldn't move. So I'm wanting to talk about the Farm Bill, why it matters. And I thought I would start with a very brief framing of this term, the Farm Bill, and how it fits in the array of federal policy work. There is, in virtually any constellation of federal programs, whether we're talking education programs or veterans or health, or in our case, agriculture and rural development, there is going to be every several years an authorization process, which is basically the process in which the committee that has jurisdiction over that area says, okay, these are the principles we're wanting to advance. Here are the programs we want to advance. And there will be some that get left behind. And in that description, that authorization will say, here's a program to accomplish X, Y, Z, and it may be funded up to a certain amount, or it may be that the authorization will mandate that it will be funded at a certain amount, or it may come up with yet a third category, which is where it says anybody who is eligible for a certain thing will be entitled to it. And you have to meet a certain criterion, or sometimes criteria, for eligibility. And those three categories correspond to the discretionary, where it says this program may be funded up to a certain amount. That's authorizing a program that's typically called a discretionary program. It's subject to the annual discretion of appropriators. The Farm Bill doesn't dictate what it will get, it just says that it might. The second one is mandatory funding, where Congress says this shall be funded at a certain amount. A lot of our conservation programs fit that category. And then the third one is called entitlement programs, where we have programs, and we have examples of each of these. In this case, we have a lot of commodity programs and also SNAP benefits, the supplemental nutrition bill, which used to be called food stamps. That's an entitlement. And the authorizations will lay out whichever of those categories a program would be in for purposes of funding. That framework we'll go into in more detail, but that happens in the case of agriculture more or less every 5 years. Implementation is the term used for taking what Congress has laid out in that blueprint and then having the relevant agency implement it. And that is, it's the rulemaking process, and it can take several years. It can take, easily 4 years of those 5 to get all the programs processed and thought through and discussed and public comment made, and then the rules promulgated, as it's termed. Another big process, and the third of the big processes that most people work on, is the annual appropriations process. I just said discretionary programs are subject to the annual discretion of appropriators. And that happens in the case of agriculture. We have, we have one of the members of our congressional delegation on the Senate Appropriations Agriculture Subcommittee. Curiously enough, on appropriations, it's the subcommittee where most of the power resides. Senator Tammy Baldwin chose to step down, but for the last couple of years, she's been chair of the Appropriations Ag Subcommittee, and she stepped down in order to take the chairmanship of a different position. But she is still on the committee. We used to have another member on the Appropriations Ag Subcommittee in the House, and he shifted as the post-election changes occurred. Another couple comment of just terms. Budget actually has more than one meaning and relevance in federal policy, and that's because a lot of people work on budgets. When you hear about the federal budget, it's worth noting that the president, usually in the early February, puts out the president's proposal for the following fiscal year. That is to say, the year that will begin the following October 1st. That kicks off that appropriations process. And in the course of that appropriations process, the congressional budget committees also lay out budgets. They establish what is the bottom line that they say the federal government can afford, and that bottom line, then they say, okay, each of those appropriations subcommittees, they say, you may have this much to deal with, you may have this much, and you may have, so they're kind of taking the big pot and then putting money into individual pots for each of the appropriations subcommittees. Budget reconciliation is a very different term, and you've heard a good bit about it this past year. That's the process where every so often, no particular timeline associated with it, and certainly no necessity for its occurring, but it does occasionally occur that Congress typically says, we don't have enough money. We need to cut our budgets, and the way to do it is not those discretionary programs, because they don't constitute enough of the federal budget. We have to go to the bone. We have to have all those authorizing committees go and deal with how much money they've put into mandatory programs or into entitlement programs. Those are the big money chunks in the federal government. And they say, okay, you authorizing committees, not appropriations, authorizing committees, you all have to cut, and here's how much you have to cut. And then they leave it to them. In a lot of ways, when you have that, it's considered kind of like when it hits agriculture, it's kind of like a mini farm bill. It's like a mini authorization, because you're going back and making major choices about the program that you've laid out. You have just witnessed this process with the IRA. You say, the IRA, that wasn't a budget cutting experience, and it was not. The reason it was used, the budget reconciliation used, is that because budgets can be so extremely important, and you don't want them to be subject to filibustering and poison pill amendments and all the other tricks that get done. You don't want to have people able to put a whole bunch of junk into the bill and have it not be germane, but people put it on because they figure, it's going to have to go anyway, and I'll get my unrelated but important to me thing in there. They clear all that stuff out, but with what they call fast track procedural expectations, which means a simple majority can pass it, not a majority able to overcome a filibuster. And it also means no amendments. And it also means you can't talk at all about, it's not appropriations. It's only those other two categories I mentioned, the mandatory and the entitlement programs for each of the authorizing committees. As I said, we just had that, and I was asked by the league to talk a little about it, and we will do so more. There's one last little term that you every so often hear, and it's a quirky one. It's called CHIMPS, changes in mandatory spending. In theory, the Farm Bill or other authorizations would say this is conservation programs, the EQIP program, the conservation stewardship program, they are mandatory funded at XYZ. And then in the chimps, you'd think since it's mandated by Congress itself, it couldn't be changed. A chimp is where Congress comes in and as appropriators, and they say, we didn't really mean that. Changes in mandatory spending is a way of saying, yeah, we know we said that in the Farm Bill, but we're still going to cut it anyway. And thankfully, we've had fewer chimps in recent years. So that's just to give you a big frame for what the Farm Bill is. In agriculture, it tends to happen every 5 years-ish. Doesn't have to be 5, but it's typical. And I'm going to just start us talking about why does it matter by just looking at the chunks in the Farm Bill. These are called titles. And it's just basically the substantive areas within the Farm Bill. And so we have the commodity title dealing with how farmers, what some of the subsidies are that support farmers. And we won't go in unless somebody has questions into why there is a commodity title. What do those commodity programs offer the nation? Why did they ever get created and what do they do? Conservation title, I'll spend more time on this one because I was asked to do that. And I think it's relevant to the very conversation that Carolyn just had about importance of water into the state and to the league. Trade title, nutrition title, credit, rural development, research extension and related matters. You can walk down these and see some of these and why they might matter. And I think that right there, that should answer the question, why does the Farm Bill matter? It touches so many parts of your life and you never even knew it. Some of the most important renewable energy programs, they're right in the Farm Bill. The energy title funds the REAP program, which is supporting renewable energy out in the countryside. And so that's just to give you a kind of a sense of what are some of the chunks, the titles within the Farm Bill. I'm going to go light on this because I pretty much feel like within the league, you all are really familiar with basic legislative pathways and how it goes. I am going to add a couple of little extra pieces in here. So the essence of it, of course, is both the House and the Senate have agriculture committees. Those agriculture committees really live and die pretty much solely for the purpose of creating a Farm Bill. That's really when you're on the ag committee, you're there in order to work the Farm Bill. And then occasionally if there's a budget reconciliation bill, but you're there for that authorizing function. Each chamber starts with the ag committee. It goes to they develop their bills. It goes to the full House. There's a discussion on the floor and amendments can be offered there. And then it will go to the full House again. It will go to each of the houses and they will pass it. And then the two houses will have to confer and decide what accommodations each will make as they negotiate out the differences between the two bills. And then there will be a final version and it'll get voted on. So simple, so simple. Well, a couple of changes or tweaks to that basic framework include something that's changed over the years in my working on. I think this is my 7th Farm Bill. And over the years, one of the things that's changed is you don't have as much focus on the subcommittees that work on the substantive issues, say the conservation subcommittee. You're in the district that has been held by Congressman Kind back in the 2002 Farm Bill. He was the chair of the conservation subcommittee or ranking minority, I guess at that point. He was the top Dem on the committee working on the conservation title. And that's where a lot of the conservation work came out. These days, it comes out in a different way. People put out what they call marker bills, basically bills that get created with no expectation that they will pass anytime ever. They are intended to be kind of an indicator species. People sign on, you say, oh, it's a bipartisan thing. A lot of people signing on to this. Oh, okay, good. And that's how the members of Congress communicate with each other about where there's the most traction and excitement around topics. At the moment, just to give you some sense of where we stand in that process, a week ago, last Friday, so not quite 2 weeks ago, in the Senate, there was a timeline that said any senator who has things that they want to have in the farm bill, you have to sort of declare what you want by that Friday to the Ag Committee chair. So marker bills, if you want to mark a bill, get it dropped by that time. And at the moment, neither committee has actually had any kind of a markup. They haven't actually taken all of the input that they've gotten and moved it forward. But we're moving in that direction. I just wanted to answer a question which probably will come up if it hasn't already in your minds. And that is, so the money in a farm bill, where does it go to? And this will give you a sort of surprising sense of that, I think. You will see that 3/4 of the 2018 Farm Bill went toward nutrition. It went to the SNAP program especially. But it's remarkable how much of the Farm Bill goes toward nutrition. The rest of the Farm Bill, you can see these percentages here. Crop insurance is 9%, commodities programs 7%, conservation 7%, and all the others, the research, the credit, the rural development, everything else is in that tiny small percent over there, 1%. You can see, therefore, why that might have impact on how people think about the Farm Bill. I'm wanting just to give you a little bit of a sense. The issue around SNAP has, for the last 2 Farm Bills, been quite a contentious one. And there has always been, and is again this year, an effort to try to cut that back and say, we're not going to be paying for that much in our nutrition. And we're not going to have a farm bill that does it. Maybe we ought to separate out the farm bill and have the nutrition outside of the rest of it and let everything else go forward. And I will tell you, we'll come back to this point. There are reasons why people don't think that's a good idea and why it's somewhat at risk if we try to do that. Just to give you a little political context about some of the budget fights we're likely to have around the farm bill. There's a strong impetus within the new, a certain portion of the Republican majority in the House, not everybody, that says, not only are we going to require pay-go, as it's termed, which says that if you're going to have mandatory spending increases, you've got to offset that with cuts from other mandatory spending or increases in revenue. They're now saying we're actually going to require cut-go, which says mandatory spending can only be offset by cuts in mandatory spending. So you can't add anything into the pot. If you're going to put in any kind of increase for conservation, which is mandatory spending, you're going to have to cut something else in mandatory spending somewhere else. That's a very tough standard to meet, and many people aren't quite clear how firmly it's going to be held to, but it will certainly affect the issues that you're introducing earlier around conservation and clean water. And of course, there's a House Republican plan, which is it has been said that they wish to cut $9 trillion from domestic programs over the next 10 years, including cutting more than $400 billion from SNAP. So there are some direct challenges to some of the essential structures. One of the reasons that matters in the passage of a farm bill, the reason nutrition is built into the farm bill and people fight to protect it in the farm bill is that the farm bill itself might not actually pass if we didn't have nutrition in it. And that has to do with where the most members of Congress are from. Our nation is becoming much more urbanized and suburbanized, and we don't actually have enough members of Congress to pass a farm bill if it didn't include interests that pertain to urban areas, such as especially SNAP. Those are critical. And so if the pressure that has been exerted and declared to cut SNAP or maybe put in requirements that say you have to do certain work of this kind or that, and other kinds of requirements that have been proposed over the years, that could make it harder to pass the Farm Bill. And one of the reasons, there are a lot of reasons actually, reasons we wouldn't like to see it delayed, or failed to pass. There are a couple of reasons that I want to highlight. One of them is when it happened in 2012, the Farm Bill was delayed until 2014, January of 2014. Functionally, it was delayed by a year. And the problem with that was because the authorization for funding expired, there were a lot of programs that we cared a lot about that didn't get funded for a year. There were programs that crossed a certain threshold, $50 million, that were allowed to be kind of funded under a great big thing that said, basically, we're going to keep going with the major base programs that have what's called baseline funding, anything that has 50 million or more. But if you didn't, there were a lot of programs that were really important programs having lots to do, for example, with farmers markets and local food procurement, of programs helping beginning farmers get started. There were a lot of programs that just were hung out to dry for a year. So you really wanted that Farm Bill to pass. There's another reason that there's an impetus to pass a bill, and that is there is kind of a default. If you don't pass the bill, there is an automatic presumption that federal policy on a lot of areas revert back to very old law that would be really hard to operate under. A lot of farmers would go out of business if you went back to some of the pricing systems way back in 1949. And so that is a way to force Congress to get this thing done. Just thought I would point out that you are sitting in the district of the one member of Congress from Wisconsin, House or Senate, who is on the Agriculture Committee. He's the newly elected member, Derek Van Orden. And in the Senate, we have nobody from Wisconsin. So you asked to have me talk a bit about conservation issues in the Farm Bill for the 2023 Farm Bill. And so I just thought I would cover a number of them kind of rapidly and then go into a little more detail, because you also asked to have me give a little bit of comparison between the Farm Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the budget reconciliation bill that passed last August, and which has funded conservation in some ways. So some of the conservation issues that I'm working on and others within the group of partners that I work with, I'm with a National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, and we have over 130 groups around the country. And we set our priorities, and climate change was very high among them. So we are working on climate smart practices, and we can go into a little more detail on what some of those are, what some of the marker bills are. Increased funding for what are called working lands programs. These are in RCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service within USDA. These are the programs that are not set-asides, but they are actually ways to help farmers who are out there practicing and farming increase their conservation, improve their conservation practices. And the two principal programs there that we focus on are the Conservation Stewardship Program and the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. We'll come back to those. Another one that I'm working very, very hard on, and the biggest thing that I'm putting most of my energy into is the next one, which is the Grazing Lands Conservation Initiative Program. Grazing is one of the practices, one of the very few agricultural practices that actually sequesters carbon. When you look at science and don't look at what people would wish to be true, you find that actually we are losing carbon with virtually every one of our agricultural practices, cover crops included, no-till included. These are programs that I very much, and practices I very much support. But in terms of sequestering carbon, they are not where it's at. Grazing comes closest. And so we're working very hard on providing some of the needs that we hear from farmers around the country. And that is the Grazing Lands Conservation Initiative offers technical assistance to help farmers learn how to convert their farm from conventional livestock production to a managed grazing system. It also funds grazing education, and it funds farmer-to-farmer meetings and exchanges and pasture walks, that sort of thing, so that farmers learn from each other how to do grazing and succeed at it. And I know that years ago, I sat on the Board of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection here for the state, and we were given reports periodically on GLCI and what it looked like. And you could tell on a map which counties had invested the money to provide match for GLCI grants. We no longer need to have match, but in those days they did. And Marathon County in the middle of the state, they put a lot of time and money into using GLCI to provide that grazing technical assistance. And that county had more grazing farms than any on either side and anywhere around it, though the topography was the same, though the demographics were the same. The difference was GLCI. And that program got a lot of farmers up and running, and they've been very successful. So I consider it a very important program, one that I work a lot on. A couple of other very important conservation issues. There's a state soil health marker bill trying to help set up programs in states and in tribal areas for creating programs that can support soil health grants, soil health technical assistance. States can do different things with it, but it's the idea is to have a national source of funding to support these state-by-state soil health programs. We have another one that's on cover crops. It's called the Cover Act. And it's basically taking a program that I'm happy to say we successfully got through the state legislature in Wisconsin. And we, in doing so, we're copying a program in Illinois that, in Iowa, that then got copied in Illinois. And it is to say to a farmer, if you plant a cover crop in the fall, you may get a $5 per acre reduction in your crop insurance for your spring crop. So if you planted a cover crop in the fall, and then we're going to plant corn after it, for example, and we're going to get crop insurance on it, this would reduce your crop insurance payment for your premium. We have a very high priority on racial equity within conservation and also in other areas. But within conservation, I've had some very important focus groups leading up to the Farm Bill hearing how difficult it can be for farmers of color to use conservation programs. It can be the case that NRCS is simply as having their office hours work, be 9 to 5. A lot of farmers of color are working another job, and they farm in the evenings and weekends. They can't make it into those offices, and they're not thus brought into the programs. There are other obstructions as well, but we're working on those, trying to remove those barriers. An area that's very similar to what I said about grazing, but broader, and that is perennial systems are critical for addressing climate. Also, as is the case with grazing, addressing water quality. You want increased infiltration, and perennial systems and grazing are the single best strategy for doing that. Another set of conservation program issues pertain to organic agriculture. And then there's always this very ticklish topic of enforcement. We have rules and we have law that says you actually, if you're going to get a commodity program payment or crop insurance, you have to have met certain conservation standards, but there's no staff to enforce it. And so it's observed in the breach by a lot of people. I'm just going to point out very briefly the Grazing Lands Initiative. I'm going to return to it to say that it existed, this GLCI did back in the late 90s, and In 2008, it got cut out during a budget cutting frenzy, and that year it was funded at 27 million. We worked very closely with Senator Baldwin's staff. She led the nation in helping to make sure that we got this refunded. Her staff was just instrumental. We hoped to get more than we got, but we ultimately ended up starting in fiscal years 22 and 23, we're at 14 million. And we are trying to increase the appropriation and also get mandatory funding in the Farm Bill for GLCI. And we're trying to get a marker bill on that very topic. I thought I would now shift into a comparison between the Farm Bill and the IRA, the budget reconciliation process. Both of them deal with agriculture committee jurisdiction or authorizations in general, but in our case, we care about the agriculture committee. Both deal with authorized programs, although the Farm Bill also addresses annually appropriated programs. If you're going to be dealing with both of them, you're going to say they both deal with authorized programs. And they also, both of them can deal with the same programs. And you'll see in the IRA that it did do so. The difference is the Farm Bill happens more or less every 5 years, and the budget reconciliation process is ad hoc. It happens when Congress says it ought to happen. And again, as I said before, the reason it happened this last time was because of the procedural nature of budget reconciliation processes, the fast track, the simple majorities. It was the vehicle that congressional Democrats and the Biden administration chose to use in order to avoid a filibuster around as passing a budget reconciliation. And so Farm Bill is what's considered regular order, all the norms of parliamentary protocols, and budget reconciliations, fast track, no amendments, stripped down process is very different from that. Enough to say on those. Let's just take a quick look at what IRA did on conservation. Amazingly, it provided $20 billion over 10 years. It's a really transformative amount of funding. $18 billion for key conservation programs, and I mentioned two of them, the Conservation Stewardship Program, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and then there are two others, one having to do with agricultural conservation easements, and then there's one that's it's called the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and basically it's a way of having a group that is a nonprofit or it's not a federal, it's not the NRCS itself, but having them hire staff to be able to administer some of these programs. What the IRA does for each of these programs is three things. It appropriates new money. It says that the new money has to have climate specific practices associated with what it's going to fund. And then it reauthorizes each program through 2031. So in that way, in order to allocate and appropriate that money, it had to have them reauthorized. So that was just a requirement. You couldn't attach money to a program you weren't sure is going to exist. So they had to go ahead and reauthorize it. So that piece of the Farm Bill work has been done, although there will be new reauthorization because there will be changes that people want to make in what exactly gets said. But it actually did protect these programs. And so there's at least that baseline protection. I thought I'd just have you see, and this is getting into perhaps more detail than you want, so I'm going to do it on the quick side, but it gives you some sense of what in each of these programs, what the IRA does. It extends the authorization through 2031. And if you look at the amount of money that Wisconsin is getting as listed out in the IRA for each of the 5 years that you would see there, normally we would be getting $20 million for the CSP, and this would add 4.2 million. Next year, we would be getting more than that, twice that, and then it would be twice that again, and then 50% more than that. So it's just a stair-step increase every year. One of the things to keep in mind is that in the same thing, I'm going to let you just look at this one. I won't say, I'll let you just look at the slide. The point is, it's one of the challenges that we face is there is not enough staff at NRCS to properly administer these programs. And so we're very excited to have these dollars. Tomorrow afternoon, we're meeting with the top staff at NRCS to kind of talk through why the IRA money is so important, but also some of the challenges that it's bringing about for the staff. They don't have enough people to actually get the farmers signed up for all of these programs. I'm just going to, again, let you look at this. I won't walk you through it. It's numbers, but you can get a sense that it is an increase. At the these two programs are administered nationally. They don't have state specific allocations. The reason I mentioned this about staff is one of the critical things is we need to increase what are called boots on the ground, people within NRCS, making sure these programs get administered properly. And we thus are thrilled that the IRA included funding for conservation technical assistance, more boots on the ground. So we are in the middle of IRA has put money out. We've got that money here in the state of Wisconsin. We're working to make sure that it gets implemented the way we think it ought to. We are working on trying to get support for many of these marker bills. I've already mentioned the Grazing Lands Conservation Initiative one. There's one specific to climate issues, Agricultural Resilience Act. And I will end there and invite questions and take off my screen so that we have some minutes for a conversation. How about that? Are there questions? Of course, I can't simultaneously see in the chat if there have been questions. Now I can come back. So let me just see if there's anything in here.
Margaret, yeah, there were a couple of questions in the chat. I'll just repeat them. So,
I actually can read them now just to say.
Okay.
I can read them now. So what do I contribute the success of the Grazing Lands Conservation Initiative in Marathon County? Great question. I think what it comes down to is if you're going to make a major change in your farm, you want to do a superb job of planning. And a good grazing plan asks a lot of questions. It helps you think through literally the physical layout of your farm. You know, where would you want to have your paddocks for rotating your animals? Where would the cow lanes be? What kinds of crops or what kind of species are you going to mix in your pasture for your forage? But you're also going to talk about markets. What price do you expect to get for the particular kind of livestock you're raising? And do you need value-added strategies to increase that amount, that price? Do you need to do special butchering? Do you need to market it as grass-based? Are there certain strategies you're wanting to pursue? You're wanting to walk all the way through from the budgets and your finances all the way through the agronomy and the actual physical layout. And it's really hard for farmers if they've already invested in a lot of equipment that's designed for planting and tilling and planting, and then going in and maybe spraying and then harvesting and taking it into the barn and having the animals come back out and having the manure come back out and be spread. That's a lot of equipment. And it's tough for farmers to face the thought that, oh my gosh, I've invested in things I'm not going to use. Ouch. Having an absolutely reliable financial analysis helps you make your decisions. And so going through that process, like with any planning process, makes you a better farmer. Means you're more likely to succeed. You're not operating on a hope and a dream. You're operating on fact. So that's the single biggest reason, I would say. And I see, Carolyn, you had another point here. One of the criticisms of some of the conservation programs is there were not enough county agents to help farmers know how to implement farm conservation changes, and not enough money to support farmers to take cropland offline to use farming strips, etc. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. That's one of the biggest concerns, and that conservation technical assistance is essential. Getting funding for boots on the ground is absolutely critical. I will also say that's there are plenty of critiques you could make about our existing programs. And one of them is that they don't currently incentivize farmers to use climate-friendly practices in particular. There's really no specific additional incentive for planting perennials. Perennials come with some challenges, some of them do, especially if you're talking woody perennials. If you're talking about a mixed perennial system where you have, for example, trees that you're going to hope to have produce a crop, let's just say you're talking a fruit or a nut crop, that'll take several years before it actually begins to pay. How do you pay for that? So having a conservation system and practices that don't encourage it means it's much less likely that farmers will do it. So trying to create in specific set aside incentives to encourage perennials, given their very disproportionate value in climate, that would be an example of one of the changes that we're hoping to see here.
So there is a question that came through the Q&A, and I'll just remind the people that are in attendance, please put your questions in the Q&A and we will forward them to Margaret. So one of the questions was, in seeking staff coverage to implement the IRA, will there be private-public partnerships?
I actually can't answer that question. It's a good question. I will be able to answer it as of after tomorrow afternoon when we've met with the top folks at NRCS to understand. I mean, I guess I'll say this. I'm sure that there will be. I just don't know the details about it. The reason I don't is it's been a lot for every single one of the federal agencies getting IRA funding. And so as they're working to get funding out, yes, they are working through, for example, the programs that I mentioned, the RCPP programs where you can apply to help. But we actually want to specifically encourage more engagement with private nonprofits and other, groups that can help get the funding optimally used. And just what that might look like, I can't yet say. I will know much better tomorrow after we talk with them and get an understanding of their intentions. Great question.
Deb, could I ask a question? I can't type in the Q&A.
Yes, go ahead, Nora.
I don't know if this is a question for you or not, Margaret, but I know we've read recently about a sort of not crisis, but criticism that's occurred between the ag community and the Biden administration's implementation of Waters of the U.S. And I wonder if you could give us a little background on that. What is it about implementation of those rules that are objectionable to many farmers?
Well, it's an interesting question because, I mean, I have a biased position on this. From my perspective, the Waters of the U.S. is already a very circumscribed set of rules. It does not apply to all sorts of things that farmers would care about, like your drainage ditches and stuff. It actually has to be water that's flowing through and applies across the landscape. But I can't even defend a criticism of it. I will say that there has been criticism that this is an attack upon agriculture, that the idea that the Clean Water Act designates, certain protections for water that crosses across private lands, but is publicly accessible. That isn't where this piece of legislation goes. It's not touching those. It is not attacking private lands. It's, from my perspective, it's basically saying the obvious, which is if we want clean water, we have to make sure that all the sources of clean water are considered. And water comes from, in a disaggregated way, it comes from places down, in concentrates. So we have to make sure that we're looking at all those places in the watershed where water's coming from. But it doesn't say we're going to come and take your rights away. It's very clear about what the protections it offers, and in the negotiations to get it further down the road, negotiators conceded some more to agricultural interests. It just seemed to me to be a pretty shocking example of agricultural interests being obdurate. That's my view. I'm not able to defend the perspective because I don't agree with it at all. I never have seen a better example of lockstep marching without a good justification for where you're going. I don't see it. So I'm sorry that I'm not able to give a balanced view. I've never been able to see it. It does not seem to me to make any sense.
It's good to know. Thanks.
That's interesting. Well, I'm not shocked to see this note in the chat that there are those who take that perspective. There has been the case for many years, but I just can't. If you actually force somebody to say, so precisely where would it constrain your rights? It just isn't something they're able to do. They can't quite exactly say it.
Do you have any suggestions for how to combat that kind of misinformation? A source that would be readily accessible to regular folks that we could be aware of?
What I'm happy to do is look and answer that question. I haven't worked on this issue for a couple of years, and so I'm sure there are better resources than what I have had way back then, because I imagine it's been developed more readily, and I'm happy to send you some and you can send them out to your community. How about that? Because I do think it's a very important issue. It's frustrating to me that something that was so reasonable and so balanced, and where the agency bent over backwards to accommodate, had listening session after listening session to accommodate, it nonetheless did not yield reason on the part of those who wanted to oppose it. That's my perspective.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Sure, happy to do. Any other questions?
Oh, Margaret,
yeah, go ahead.
I do, Margaret. It's kind of a good segue to kind of my question, and that is, if we look at the League's role of education and advocacy, I'm wondering if you have some advice for us about who might be our partners to provide better information, to provide linkages for us to learn more, as well as be effective advocates, looking at the Farm Bill and the implementation of the IRA. So who would we look to say, because if our League is about forming partnerships with nonpartisan organizations who share our commitment to the environment, are there local government entities we might look to? Are there other local conservation groups, farm organizations, so that we are listening to both sides, but have an opportunity to maybe help improve the discourse?
I love the idea, and it's entirely achievable. I myself am a big bridge crosser. I intentionally work with, in fact, For the marker bill I'm working on, I have specifically reached out to find conservative leaning members of the Senate. And also I've reached out to Mr. Van Orden and his staff to try to make sure that the grazing issue is recognized to be the bipartisan issue that it is. It ought to be, and it is. And so why not make a point of saying you all should lead? Because if it starts leading with one party, and then it may be that the other party doesn't join in. So it's important to start with the most conservative elements and then have others become the Greek chorus. So anyhow, back to your question. There are lots of groups, and I very much support an easy approach would be to go to the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. I'm saying it this way because it's something that other states could do if you're talking to leagues in other states. And I know, Carolyn, you are in serving several states. So I thought it might be helpful to frame it this way rather than just a Wisconsin specific answer. If you go to the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, its website is easy, sustainableagriculture.net. You won't have a hard time remembering that. And if you look up under its membership, you will see that there are people and groups in a lot of the states that we have here in the upper Midwest. So we have a number of Iowa groups, a number of Minnesota groups, Wisconsin groups, Illinois groups. I don't remember if you said Michigan. I think it was just those four. And Dakotas as well, if that is still relevant. And it would make sense to me to look up those groups and reach out and find any one of them. I don't think there's a single group among that bunch that wouldn't be delighted to work with you. We've got great advocates across the board looking at these issues and very committed to getting good information out, committed to farmer engagement and farmer empowerment and helping farmers learn how to communicate fact to members of Congress and their opinions. And so there are some wonderful groups, and you will see them listed on the National Sustainable Ag Coalition. I, of course, have individual names, and if you wanted to reach out to me, I'm happy to suggest those. But as a general way to find folks, that's a good one.
And you mentioned that you are communicating with Representative Van Orden, and is there through your organization a way that we could help you in that advocacy?
Love it. Absolutely. I'd love to send you all an action alert that I sent. No, I will say this action alert was most effective before, while the Ag Committee chairs were still gathering information and preferences from members, but it's still a super appropriate idea to let him know. And I would send you an action alert on the Grazing Lands Conservation Initiative that I designed specifically for his district. I'd love to send that to you, and you could circulate it among your members in his district and let him know why it matters. I'd love to do that.
Okay, well, let's see, given the time, I'm not seeing any other questions in the Q&A. In the chat, Carolyn is telling us that there's a huge partnership following the League of Women Voters US that has signed on to agricultural farm policy. So we will continue to keep it in the forefront of our members. And I think I would like to thank Carolyn for her work with UMR, and thank you, Margaret, for sharing this. I am going to remind everybody that we'll see if this works, that we have meetings coming up. So we've been living virtually. Soon we will hopefully meet in person when the state meets in La Crosse in June. Our annual meeting is May 15th. And the UMR meeting is May 22nd. So be sure you have those dates. Watch for the updates, the newsletters that come through our email, as well as you can always check our website and the fabulous social media team that works on our meetings. And if you have ideas for next year's Lunch and Learn program, something you'd like to see us feature beginning in September, we take a hiatus in the summer. Why, you can send those messages through our website to let us know what's on your mind and you think is important for members to be thinking about throughout the year. So I will, with that, say thanks again, Carolyn and Margaret. It's been a great year, and we will see you at some fun event this summer that you'll be hearing about. So, and
Thank
I will end
you,
the program, and thank you, and
everybody.
have a great spring day. Bye.
Thank you.